This is Inspiring Design, where unique innovators come together to share their knowledge, share their insight, and keep us up to date with the latest industry trends. And here's your host, Roshan Senanayake.
So welcome to the very first episode of the Inspiring with Design with myself, and I've got one of the very special guests with us here today. We've got Andrew Scott, senior lecturer for the School of Design at QUT Creative Industries faculty. Andrew is widely known for his work in supporting the secondary sector. He constantly gives back with a lot of workshops and speaking at conferences. He's also a member of the expert writing team for the new design syllabus that's coming up and implemented next year. Not only that, he's also been a presenter at many of the QCAA implementation workshops in the recent past as well. Now, I've had the pleasure of working with Andrew since actually 2013 under his leadership in delivering the Introduction to Design core unit at QUT. It's a short but intensive course that falls within each design disciplines for the first years. And every year we have a lot of fun, and it's a unique experience from the student side as well. We have a lot of fun doing it and teaching it, and really good feedback. So welcome and thank you for joining us today, Andrew.
Great to see you, Shan. Great to see you again.
So tell me a little bit about your role and background here at QUT.
Well, I've been teaching at QUT, a long time. I think this is my 31st year. That's embarrassing.
Wow. Not embarrassing at all.
My background's in industrial design, so I was educated, I got my degrees at QIT. And I was quite drawn to teaching quite early on. So I was doing some practice and then teaching part-time, and slowly the balance switched to full-time teaching quite rapidly. I like the pace, I guess, and the control of teaching. I've been doing it for quite a while now, and mostly I concentrate on first year. So I've taught at all levels of our programs, including our graduate diploma, the one we used to have. But I've generally gravitated to first year, teaching first year students, people just coming in, many of them from high schools, but about half of them are mature age students. And I guess that's a really satisfying place to work, because you see such a radical difference in their abilities from one semester to the next. So it's a very quick, it's very rewarding.
No, that's brilliant. And you've been delivering the DB 101 Introduction to Design for how long has it been now?
This year was the 13th.
13th year. Yeah, that's brilliant. And I've only been lucky enough to be part of it since 2013, and I've always had fun. So as a student in 2008, I think, and as a tutor, so that's great. So in design education, obviously being in there for 31 years, that's incredible. What would you say has been the biggest changes and challenges that you can see as a design educator, or just in general as the design industry, and as part of the education system?
Well, I suppose there's a couple of things that have changed over that time. From an education perspective, one of the biggest changes is the class sizes. So our class sizes are much bigger. We used to teach classes of around about 30 people, and usually our industrial design classes in first year are around about 140, 120. So that was quite a traumatic change initially, and so you have to be a lot more prepared, a lot more systematized, I guess. Of course, technology's changed quite a lot, but that has perhaps been has had less change on how we teach design than you might think. So I think many people assume that designers are kind of predominantly digital, and maybe in some disciplines they are. So I imagine web design and disciplines, graphic design, very heavily orientated towards digital production. But in many fields of professional design, we're still very much grounded in pencil on the paper. And I think many people wonder if that's just some old fuddy-duddy teaching the way they've always taught. But we do take pains to stay in contact with industry, to talk to people in design offices, and see what skills they look at. And it's been a constant that people want to see rough sketches. They want to see how people can actually sketch and draw conceptually, and we take for granted that they can do the really polished CAD stuff as part of their portfolio. So I think that's kind of interesting. The technology has changed, but the basic approach to how design works is a constant. The process is little changed, which is kind of surprising.
No,
I don't see it changing in a hurry either. I think we'll use more digital tools. We might use more virtual tools in the near future. But I think at its core, I think the basic skills are quite unchanged.
So regardless of the technology changing and all these different platforms are coming on board, the pen on paper, you think it'll never be replaced?
Well, it's so cheap and it's so fast.
That's
once
true.
You've acquired a certain amount of skill, and it's extremely portable. So I think depending on your discipline, there's usually a blending of analog and digital skills. And depending on the project, the duration of the project, the complexity of the project. But what we expect our students to develop is skills in a broad range of tools. Many of those tools are analog, making rough models, simple models, making polished models, drawing sketches on paper, and many of those are digital, doing CAD models, doing rapid prototyping models, and it's a really blended skill set, and I think that makes design very hands-on. Not so much the hands-on of making the finished thing, but very hands-on in exploring the ideas.
No, definitely. Now this is actually something that I've noticed in this last semester with my fourth years is their sketching has even translated onto using an Apple pencil on an iPad, and most of the students actually bring a large Apple iPad Pro, and they're doing sketches on that. None of them actually they don't actually bring trace paper anymore, which confused me a little bit, and I sound old about saying that, but I actually really prefer it personally because I played around with a few things, and because of the pressure sensitivity and the 3D touch thing, it's actually very much like you're drawing on paper. That I think it can get a little bit more intuitive. But have you ever had any experience using that yet?
Yes. I'll get my bag here. This is my iPad Pro. I always travel with my
there you go
my Apple Pencil and my iPad Pro, and I love using it. I do a lot of work in class with it with my students, because internally the industrial design department has been discussing for a few years now at what point are we going to insist that our students
bring one,
buy a tablet and a stylus. We don't think we're there yet because there are some cost.
True.
There's a cost of entries is not to be ignored.
Absolutely.
And so we're not quite ready to do that yet, but it's getting close. But as you said, the skills are highly transferable. So what you learn with a pencil and a marker on a sheet of A3 bond paper is extremely transferable to a digital sketching medium. So I think for schools where you've got a lot of students and a lot of cost, to kitting the whole class out with, to be able to do design. I think it's interesting that the actual setup costs can be very, very low. They can be some low cost pens. You don't even have to get the Copic markers to start off with. It's mainly about rapidly exploring lots of ideas to think visually as early as possible and as often as possible in the process. And I think you can rely on people acquiring those skills on paper and quite seamlessly moving to a digital realm when they can or when they want to or if they want to. And I don't think they should feel poorer for not having those initially.
Yeah, and I've actually been an admirer of your sketches that you've been, I think, posting recently on Inktober.
Oh yeah, Inktober is a great fun. Yeah,
it's actually been. I've been really impressed looking at those. Was that hand or was that on the iPad?
No, those are all. I've got my book here. They're all on ink. I was just thinking to myself, geez, maybe next year I should do them on my iPad.
On the iPad, yeah.
But when I did number 8, where I overworked the paper, that's just ink. Saturating the paper.
Yeah.
For me, doing it using ink on paper is a bit of a pleasure. Like it's not what I do
on the
for
iPad.
My students.
Yeah.
So it's fun to work in a medium that isn't necessarily your preferred medium for a while.
Yeah.
You know, that imposes limitations and other opportunities as well. So
yeah,
it's been a bit of fun.
And it is something that I've started to notice in a lot of younger firms. Like a few of my colleagues have opened up building designer firms and architectural firms, and they are actually marking up drawings and things like that on site completely using their iPad and an Apple Pencil. So even that transition of you saving paper, there you go, that's amazing.
Yeah, so I've been doing rough sketches on my iPad and then creating the finished sketch on paper. Just because, I don't know.
There you go, that's brilliant.
Yeah, so you're seeing more people...
even in the industry, yes.
Doing it digitally.
Because I have a feeling people are transitioning away from and looking at paperless design processes and things like that.
Yeah.
So it's got its merits. I think the more and more the technology improves, it can work. Now, for the benefit of our listeners, do you have any apps that you use to do the sketching?
If I'm using an iPad, the apps are the apps that I have in my dock. The ones I use all the time. The primary one is Procreate. Which I think costs around $12 or $15.
Okay.
But they never charge for
like upgrades. A once-off payment.
One off, yeah.
Okay. Yep.
They're a Tasmanian company. Company's in Hobart.
That's good.
Just as an aside. The next one is Autodesk Sketchbook, and I tend to use this when I need ellipses. Because Procreate doesn't have an ellipse tool.
I see, yeah.
So in industrial design, we're often drawing quite rectilinear forms and lots of cylinders and circular elements creep in. So I use that for some of those tasks, and it's got a nice symmetry tool. Although Procreate just introduced a symmetry tool in version 4 just recently. But the symmetry tool is really good for sketching a lot of products which are symmetrical. So you can set up a reflective axis and crank them out. I can go on about this for ages, so don't let me bore you.
No, that's all right. I'm actually learning about. I have never heard of Procreate before. I've only been using Autodesk Sketchbook.
Well, Sketchbook is a great tool.
Yeah,
I really like the pencil tool, the original pencil tool. But this page of blenders, sketches of blenders, these are all using the mirror tool in Sketchbook.
I see.
Just moving it and creating a new symmetrical sketch.
So this was done 100% on the iPad?
Yeah, this was just drawn on this device with the Apple Pencil.
That's brilliant.
Very quick, using layers. That's the lovely thing about the layers is you can do a rough sketch and then a more polished line on another layer and turn off the rough sketch if you need that. For this kind of conceptual thinking, it's not necessary. You don't worry about those rough lines. They're part of the process, and you don't need to hide them. Those are the two main ones. I use Concepts a little bit.
Concepts?
Yeah, I use Concepts a little bit. I'm not entirely comfortable with it. It's a vector-based program. Some things that don't quite click for me. Linear Sketch. That's actually a little bit expensive for what you get. Another good free app is Adobe Sketch. So it's got a really nice pencil tool. That's another. I've been doing that for rough studies for Inktober. In Adobe Sketch. Look, there's so many good apps. In terms of, I know some students using the Microsoft Surface Pro. And I think that's a good device. I have a Surface Pro 2, and I found that quite wanting. But I think the more recent devices are quite good, and the sketching, the stylus is pretty good too. And so I don't think there's as many sketching apps on the Surface Pro as there are on the iPad, but I think Sketchbook is a very good one. So that's good wherever you can find it.
No, that's great. So basically, to summarize, it's the Autodesk Sketchbook, there's Concepts, and then there was the Adobe Sketchbook.
Adobe Sketch.
And
for me, the top one is Procreate.
Yeah. But that's the paid app, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. So, most of them have a paid component.
For premium features and so on.
The Adobe Sketch really wants you to have an Adobe ID, although you can use it for free. But if you want to import, export, and save stuff, you may need a subscription. Sketchbook has a basic layer. I know that actually they recently made the Pro feature free. So Sketchbook's pretty good.
No, that's great. That's actually really helpful, and because I've been asking these questions from my students, so it's good for me, my learning as well, and as well as the listeners. Now, obviously, I think with all this technology coming up, I think one of the biggest concerns that teachers have is the time to learn these things. So if you've never used it before, you need to go through a bit of a learning curve. Now, my first question is: do you actually dedicate like an ongoing time where you consistently want to learn about new technology and trial and test these things?
I guess I've generally done it pretty organically. So I've always liked sketching. I don't usually sketch recreationally, but it's so convenient with the iPad that I don't need to have a whole pile of markers and stuff. So if I want to sketch something, I'll often just grab the iPad these days. I suppose I haven't really driven myself to master new things, particularly except out of interest, and they just align well for me. I would say, in terms of teachers feeling the pressure to be on top of all these different things, I would say, don't worry, just relax. I think it's nice to be able to show students that you are to demonstrate certain things, like across the table in a classroom setting, but I don't feel the need to be an expert in everything my students can do. So I don't know very much CAD. By the time my students are moving into second year, they know SolidWorks much better than I do. I know a tiny little bit of SolidWorks. I don't presume to be an expert in that. And so when we're talking about a design and they've got some SolidWorks models on the screen, I don't need to know how they are driving that. It's the idea that drives the discussion. So in general, I'd say this is true about all aspects of design teaching. You don't have to be an expert in everything. It's the idea, the process is everything. And the tools are kind of interchangeable. They have different strengths and weaknesses, and you don't have to be an expert in every tool. That's what I'd say. Otherwise, you just go bonkers.
That's true.
There's just not enough hours in the day. So I would say, sorry.
No, that's okay. It's something along the same lines was now that I've been out of conventional architectural practice for about almost 2.5 years now, I've forgotten Revit. It used to be my bread and butter, and now when students ask a Revit question, honestly, sometimes I can't answer it. I need to actually go back and have a look at it. But there's nothing stopping you from guiding a 4th year level design student to bringing a concept to construction stage. Like you said, it's just the tool, and there are multiple tools. So that's great.
I mean, so many of those technical questions are discoverable online as well. So you can usually find out the answer to a particular technique question by going online. So it's quite different from when I was a student and the early years of my teaching, when we didn't have Google searches and so on.
That's true.
You had to know this stuff. It's very hard to discover the answers to things like that. There was a big barrier to that knowledge. Now it's very transportable, very accessible, and so you don't need to be the font of all knowledge in the design studio. You need, I think, the expertise teachers need to have to teach design is to be comfortable with the design process and guiding people through the process, but they don't need to be experts in the tools that students could adopt. So you could have people in a classroom using quite different tools, driven by their particular aptitudes and interests, which might be quite different from how you do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's quite liberating. Teachers don't need to be experts in everything.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. And taking a step back here and going a little bit off-road, actually, do you think with the design process, design thinking comes into play a lot?
Yeah, I guess I think that the phrase design thinking, this is my take on it.
Yep.
Okay. We have a word for when you use design process to solve ideas in the creation of products, environments, garments,
yep.
graphics. We call that designing. Mm-hmm. I think design thinking is the lessons people have taken from how designers work to be used in non-design areas. You know what I mean? Like, to me, it's a subset of design.
That's interesting.
Maybe it's a Venn diagram in that design thinking is often used in business settings, mm-hmm. Where you're not necessarily creating things, you're not designing things, you're creating systems and various services, but you're using design thinking. So you're using things that designers use for three-dimensional problem solving to design non-three-dimensional things.
Yeah. Outside of the design industry.
So to me, design thinking is when we use design processes to outside the design professions.
Yeah.
So not everyone probably agrees with that.
Yeah.
But that's my way of thinking about it.
No, that's great. And something I've found in my own learning is that when you research about the design thinking model, everyone has a slightly different take on it.
Yeah.
Some call it creative problem solving, some call it design thinking, some call it design process and ideas thinking, and a whole bunch of these different labels to it. At the end of the day, something I do agree with you, because at the end of the day, the human is the center, and a designer would put the user at the center and design a product, whether it's industrial design or a space or whatever, and then using that same process for outside of the design industry, and people are bringing that knowledge on board. So it's quite interesting, and it fascinates me.
Yeah, it interests me. I've had a look at a few books on design thinking.
Yeah.
And when you kind of decode the diagram, like you said, they're all got slightly different ways of representing it. Often when you delve down into it, the part that designers do is actually quite a small part of many design thinking diagrams.
Yeah.
And it leads on to other things which are more business operations and business processes, marketing and sales and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of design thinking is actually organised for business purposes, mm-hmm. Not design businesses. And so I think it can be a bit disorientating if you think you're teaching design, so you need to know design thinking. You'll find a whole lot of stuff which isn't to do with designing.
That's true.
It's peripheral or later on in the process.
Yeah.
So I think that can be a little bit confusing to the novice.
Yeah.
So I'd say take it with a pinch of salt. There's design thinking books a little bit.
No, definitely. In the recent, we've been training teachers in design thinking and the actual process with a hands-on process, so they understand what it's all about. And this is something that we've outlined. It is a process for business or any other industry, really, but there are a lot of overlaps and things that work for both parties. So understanding those things, definitely the clarification is required. Looking back at the students now, from a student's point of view, coming from high school through to university and then looking at entering the industry, what pressures do you think they have with having to learn all these tech equipment, apps, tools, the breadth of knowledge that's required compared to even when I was going through a student, I feel like has doubled.
I couldn't quantify that myself. I think the design education, tertiary design education, has always been a very kind of heavy commitment for the student, because there are just so many things you need to learn.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a change in degree, I'm not sure. Industrial design students have always had to work really long hours to become good at that, because as well as mastering a whole lot of knowledge, a whole lot of information, so technical stuff like manufacturing processes, materials, ergonomics, things like that. There's a whole lot of knowledge to be acquired, but at the same time there's a whole lot of skills to be developed and refined. So traditionally that was drawing and drafting, and a whole lot of hands-on model making. I think nowadays that's still true. There's a lot of knowledge and a lot of skills to acquire. Some of the old skills are no longer essential, and new ones have replaced them. So I think whereabouts, when I was a student, we learned a lot of, I learned to use lathes and milling machines to make very precise models. Nowadays that's going to be handled by a CNC box or a 3D printing box. So that's a different set of skills, where the box does a lot of the hard stuff for you, but you've got to know a lot about how to drive it correctly. So those skills have changed, but they're all in service of exploring lots of ideas, many ideas, refining them to produce a really polished, successful solution. So maybe you're right. Maybe it is greater than it used to be. I'm not so sure. I just don't know.
Oh no,
it is intimidating.
It is. The thought the thought was in my mind, because when I was in first year, the number of softwares that I had to learn, I didn't really find out about that stuff until I actually came into first year. And then compared to that, now on top of with the applications and then rendering programs and the different types of plugins to each program, it's becoming much more competitive as well. And students who are learning Revit alone, for example, versus ArchiCAD from an architectural point of view, or in an industrial point of view, it might be SolidWorks and I don't know is there a competing one for industrial design?
I think some of the Alias might have some packages. We use SolidWorks because that's what all the industrial design practices locally and in Australia use predominantly.
Actually, something that just crossed my mind. Do you use Inventor at university, and do you think the industry uses it?
I think we've had some students this year say, can we use Inventor? Do we have to learn SolidWorks?
Yeah.
And the answer is always, yes, you have to learn SolidWorks. No, you can't use Inventor. Ideally, these skills, the skills you develop in one software package are transferable.
Yep.
So it's actually the way you think when you're making a 3D model inside a computer. Many of those processes are the same for different software packages. They just maybe have different commands and different ways to the same place, but they should be transferable. I suppose coming back to your question about do university students have an intimidating amount of knowledge to acquire? I guess my observation is that it's similar to the way it's always been, in that people prioritize skills that they think are very marketable, things that will get them the job. Students at uni always gravitate, when given the preference about learning something theoretical or learning something that's a tool, they'll go for the tool because that gives them, they can demonstrate that clearly. Our students need the technical knowledge in industrial design and the CAD knowledge, because that's what they usually get employed at. They get employed to sort of work under someone else, executing things and working out the details. We're really keen to make sure that design graduates at QT are not just good employees, but good competition for their employees. You know what I mean? So we need to produce designers who can actually take leadership roles, not just be good employees, but actually set up their own firms, perhaps eventually, perhaps not immediately, but be able to be well-rounded enough not to just follow orders, but to make orders, so to speak. So at uni we want to produce a well-rounded graduate, not just someone who's highly skilled in following someone else's instructions.
I can definitely vouch for that.
Absolutely. Look at what you're doing. I guess I think it's definitely doable. It does demand a lot of a university student, though. It is a demanding thing to study, isn't it?
Definitely. Now, actually, being in tertiary education and working with secondary educators at the same time, what are the biggest observations that you have that sets apart the two sectors almost, especially in teaching and then from a student's point of view, what do you think?
Well, I've been involved with QCAA for quite a long time now. In the graphic syllabus early on, about 10 years ago, I think. Can't remember exactly. And most recently in the design syllabus. I think the design syllabus is, if I do say so myself, a really good syllabus.
Step in the right direction.
Yeah, no, I was never sat well with the original technology studies and graphics. I think there were two sides of the same coin, and I think it's much more integrated now. So I like where it's going. It's not there yet, but it's definitely a good thing.
Yeah.
I think the big challenge is, I guess where I was coming from on that is that one of the things that struck me working with QCAA and the writing team this time around is the kind of stuff that teachers have to deal with. I don't have to deal with the same kind of bureaucracy, the same kind of language. At uni, I get to teach the thing I know an awful lot about, or a fair bit about, or pretend to know a lot about, and I can concentrate on industrial design.
Yeah.
I teach some design to first years in all disciplines, but design principles. I get to focus. Now, at the high school, teachers don't have that luxury to just teach the types of design they're interested in. They have to teach
everything
broad, a design process that's broad, and allow students to design things in the area that calls to them, be it a building, a garment, an interactive experience, a product, or a landscape, or an interior space. So I think that's quite challenging, and that was something when we first started writing the syllabus. I'm thinking, how would I do that? That's tough, know. And my understanding of it now is that I think, as I was saying before, I think the way to deal with that as a high school teacher is not to present yourself as an expert in all types of design, to have some things that you find personally quite interesting and you can speak authoritatively in terms of examples in those areas, like you might be really into architecture, and that can be the thing that you illustrate examples with occasionally. But I think it's about running the process, and the design process is a robust tool for discovering things that you didn't know about the problem, generating lots of variety, researching so you know how to judge what's a good solution and a bad solution, and the process is a machine for generating ideas and helping you refine through to something that is an optimal solution given the current circumstances. It's always a compromise. So as long as you're familiar with that process and you can trust it, you can help teach that to students without being an expert on everything. So I think the tertiary and the secondary spaces in design teaching have quite substantial differences, but the process is what binds it all, keeps it working and makes those things work.
I honestly love the way I can genuinely see the passion while you're talking about it. So that's great. Sorry, that was
I think that's a good point. I think everyone who's a professional designer or trained to be a professional designer like yourself, it's passion that gets you through.
That's true.
Because it's a long road, isn't it?
Oh, definitely.
There's 4 years undergraduate,
that's just
2 years of masters.
Yep.
All that kind of stuff. It's a long road.
Yep.
And the only thing that gets you there is passion.
Yep.
You can be talented, but not passionate, and you won't make it.
Definitely.
And I think it's that passion that is what teachers need for design. I think the passion makes it exciting and contagious. Your students will catch that from you. Some of them, not all of them perhaps. That's okay. It's not for everybody perhaps. But the passion drives you to acquire the skills that you need, and also the passion drives you to enjoy what you're doing and make it fun. And I think that's the biggest challenge of teaching design, is making it fun each step of the way. And sometimes that's not always easy, especially when you look at the syllabus and you look at the content that teachers need to cover. Certainly in Unit 1 and Unit 2, it's quite a confronting list of things. And I would say to teachers looking at that and feeling that tension in the pit of their stomach, it's okay. You don't have to be an expert in that. It's it's broaching a lot of topics and building enthusiasm, and students will follow those things. It's about making an environment where people can follow their passions and learn more about things that really excite them. And that's what makes the design studio classroom so much fun. It's not everyone in lockstep doing exactly what you say. It's everyone going in different directions, and you kind of keeping a handle on the complexity level, not letting it get too hard for them, not letting it get too easy where it bores them. It's about pitching the design problems at the right level for them, and that's true at uni, and it's true at high school.
And something that I've observed is that at a tertiary level, tutors are encouraged to facilitate rather than teach, quote unquote spoon feed them, whereas at a high school level that's followed in a slightly different way. They've been given very specific instructions to follow. Do you think that at a high school level teachers should engage a more facilitation approach for design, or still stick with the teaching approach?
I'm trying to remember the right terminology for the two different, I forget them. The one approach is very prescriptive, and the other is sort of very open, that's right, constructivist. And I guess what I find in my teaching is in the first semester I'm more prescriptive, and as that semester kind of ends and blends into the second semester, I get more constructivist. I give students more autonomy as they go on. So I think it's a useful thing to do in the high school space is to have some quite prescriptive exercises and techniques which let students build confidence in parts of the design process. You can practice doing a particular type of thing for a while. And it's really about building that confidence, and then as they get more confident, they can exercise more autonomy and more control within the design process, and go off in different directions. So I guess my answer to your question is both. I think giving a mentoring students on the process is always the main thing. And in the early starting off things, helping them with you need to do this, then this, then this, fairly nuts and bolts stuff is helpful for building their confidence.
It's something that I firmly believe whenever I'm teaching, whether it's fourth years or first years, is that because it's design, I'm always trying to facilitate as much as possible after I've been prescriptive with the direction that they need to take. Because something I've found is if I'm trying to teach rather than facilitate, then I'm kind of imparting my own biases and upbringings and thoughts and ideas to influence their design. So I'm always trying to be aware of that and facilitate them after they get to that level, though, for them to carry on whatever their unique design style might be, and it shouldn't be me. I don't want create 20 copies of myself. It needs to be whoever they are. So that's great.
That's really true. I absolutely agree with you. So facilitating their own discovery is really important. I guess I think of it as co-discovery. You're kind of working shoulder to shoulder, discovering ideas or solutions for a given design challenge. And it's not like you have the answers in the back of the book. One of the things I say to my students, I think a good tutor is a facilitator, but it can be frustrating for novice students when all their tutor is doing is asking them provocative questions. I think sometimes hey, throw us a bone, which is this one good or is this one good? And I think a little bit of that kind of yourself is fine as well.
No, definitely.
It's about finding that balance as they get better, get more familiar with it.
I get that question thrown at me all the time. Students are like, just tell me what to do or pick one, and I always give them my answer, but I always give a little bit of a disclaimer saying that this is my point of view only. You shouldn't actually go with it just because I've said it. If you think it's a bad choice with the design, then go with the direction that you think is the right thing. So that's great. I
always say to students, I can tell you what I would do, but I'm not the designer in this conversation. So I can suggest, why don't you try this? But I am not going to try it and then discard it if it doesn't work,
Exactly.
or change it into something else. So my students say, oh, that's a great idea, I'm going to do that. And I say, well, I might still fail you for that, because I'm not in a position to know if that's going to work.
Correct.
I can give you a suggestion and you can investigate it, but it's up to you to discard it or morph it, and to make it work. It's not my responsibility to make it work.
Yeah.
So you can ask me, but it's your responsibility.
Yeah. No, that's great, and it gives them a level of accountability as well. I think
they don't like hearing that. I should add.
They don't like hearing.
They don't like hearing that very much.
But anyway, I think we're almost up for our time. But one of the last things I wanted to ask was, obviously coming from such an experienced place, do you have any pearls of wisdoms that you would like to share with design educators on design or in education in a general way?
I think what I probably echo some of the things I've already said. I think it's about building confidence, helping new students of design, building confidence in a process so they can feel that they don't need to know the answer at the start. When you give a student a design problem, they really want to know, can I do it? Do I have a solution right now, right at the beginning? That solution isn't worth having if you can have it right at the beginning. It's probably not much of a design task if it's that obvious. So you want to give them, help them build confidence in the process and know that they can trust themselves and you to guide them through that process to get a viable, optimal solution given the constraints. Building that confidence. We talked about enthusiasm, super important.
And passion.
Yeah, passion, that's right. And I suppose the other thing I would try to do in the classroom is not try and hide my ignorance. So there are a lot of things I don't know about, and when I think I know, when I've got some knowledge about a particular question, I'll say, you might try this and this and this. But if I don't know, then my advice is, how can we find out? So where should we go and look for that information? Who can we talk to? What research can we do online? And so, to my mind, the design process is so worthwhile, not just for designers, but for everyone, because it does teach you a way of researching, prioritizing, sorting through information, matching it up with ideas, not just having one idea and betting the farm on one idea, but having this iterative approach to often just coming up with lots and lots of possible ideas. And as you go through the process, learning more about what makes it a good idea or a bad idea and helps you decide. So that process is it. And I'd say you don't need to present to your students as the great god of design. You just mean it's kind of like, we're in this together. And we'll adjust the project, we'll adjust the challenge as we go, as we learn new things. So we'll start out doing X, and if we hit a wall, I'm able to tweak that and say, okay, we're going to do Y now. And so it's about that discovery together, not having all the you don't want or need all the answers to the design challenge at the start. You want a process that helps you acquire them.
That's brilliant.
So you're in there together.
Definitely. I think vouch for the same process as well. When we're, regardless of the experience level, like you said, the process is still the same, and you are in it together. So that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Andrew.
Great talking to you.
Thank you so much for your time.